Pat yourself on the back because you are right here, right now, for a reason. Welcome to the On Purpose podcast, where together we will empower ourselves and others to live lives with more passion and purpose. Hello, OPP community. Today, we have a very unique guest that I am excited to have on the show. He is a museum curator at the historic Wendover Airfield in Utah. He's a husband and father of two, soon to be three, and he is working to live a more authentic life personally and professionally. So please help me welcome Mr. Landon Wilkey. How you doing this morning, Landon?
Doing great. Hello, OPP community. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we love to have you here. And, one thing Ali forgot to mention, he's one of my newest friends because I just met Landon last week on part of my travels. And honestly, this is exactly the kind of stuff I want to do as I travel the country, is meet amazing people that our paths wouldn't have crossed if we weren't out living our lives with purpose, and to bring their stories back. So Ollie was talking off air. I was super pumped when I met Landon, and I got to take that tour with him. And I called Ollie from my desert oasis, and we're just grateful, Landon, that you agreed to come on the show. And I think our community is going to get a lot of value out of what you have to share with them.
Hope so. Glad to be here.
But like any good athlete, Landon, we don't just jump you into the heavy stuff. We got to warm you up, my friend. So first warm-up question. Go ahead and shake out them shoulders a little bit. Let's get you loosened up. You, Landon, get abandoned on an island, and you're going to eat one thing for the rest of your life. What do you eat?
That's a tough one.
One thing, buddy.
Right off, I love steak, but I think that would quickly shorten my lifespan if that's the only thing I ate. But
Dude, Ribeye Island? That sounds great to me.
It really does. But I do love eggs, though. There's a lot more options with those, maybe slightly healthier. Let's go with eggs. Make sure I have a fresh supply.
All right, fair enough. That's a very logistical answer, not surprising. I still remember Scott Savage was taking guava.
Yeah.
Or agave, whatever you make tequila out of.
The agave plant, yeah, he was being real tactical.
He was going to make tequila was his one thing. All right.
Steak and eggs. Landon's my guy right there. That's my go-to breakfast.
That's a good island to get abandoned on. Like, I was thinking, you get abandoned on an island, you get some fruit, maybe some tropical type fish. Man, you guys are going Midwest kind of island.
Love it. All right, Landon, warm-up question number 2. If you could be any superhero, a real existing fictional superhero like Superman, or one that you make up like Super Landon, and have one superpower, who would you be and what would your superpower be?
And here's another thing. I never got too into the comics. I was always kind of stuck in my history books because those guys are heroes to me anyway. But I just want to be myself, hopefully improve, and I would love to fly. I mean, that would be the best power in my opinion.
Flying? Where would you go?
Everywhere.
Just zoom around the neighborhood?
It just sounds freeing to be able to pop up in the air for a bit.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Landon, favorite book and current book you're reading?
My favorite book is Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. I try to read it annually. Very refreshing way to get into summer, remind myself there's beauty in life, to see things from a fresh perspective. And something I just started, because I just found out it existed, is MASH, the novel. So I did not know the TV show and movie were based on a book. So I just got that for my birthday and I'm getting that started.
Oh, nice. And that one kind of ties into a lot of what you're doing at work, right?
Yeah.
Same era, at least.
Pretty close.
Interesting. Dandelion Wine. Talk to me about that one. What is that one? So it sets you up for summer and life being renewed?
So it's really based on Ray Bradbury's childhood growing up in Waukegan, Illinois. And it's just about the magic of childhood and kind of some of the horrors of having to grow up as well. But it's kind of a really introspective book and makes you think about how you're growing, what you're going through, celebrating traditions, recognizing traditions. So always a good refresher.
Interesting. And then you try and apply that. So as a dad with young ones and another one on the way, you try to apply those lessons in their childhood, or how does that interact with your day-to-day life?
Oh, absolutely. He has terrific grandparents, great parents. So those role models reflect, but he also gets to do a lot of fun things, some fun things I never did as a kid. I mean, even as simple as running through the grass barefoot. I mean, that's something I want my kids to make sure they have those opportunities at times. We don't have a lot of grass here in Wendover.
No, you don't, my friend. I didn't see any grass in Wendover.
Finding some equivalent things. They have put their toes in the salt flats, so that's something.
That's true. That's good. All right, Landon, I got to tell you, man, when so for the community, Andrew and I were traveling through, and I'd never even heard of Wendover, Utah, or West Wendover, Nevada. So we stopped, and I, too, love history and just understanding where we've been and where we're going. I think it's a lot of your future can be seen in where you've been and learning the mistakes of the past or building on the successes. So I went to Wendover, the old Army Air Force Base, and when I got there, the young lady at the front desk told me that I couldn't take, that there was a conference in the big room, so I couldn't see most of the museum, and I didn't have to pay because I could only see one little piece. So I was kind of bummed. I was like, oh, man. And then Landon comes in and says, hey, I'm about to take these guys on a tour. Do you want to jump in? So I jump in, and Landon takes me on a tour, and I was fascinated, Landon, with the passion and the excitement in which you shared the stories of people that were doing what they did far before our lifetime, right? Like none of us were even born then. So help me understand, Landon, how did you first get into history, and where does that passion for your storytelling come from?
So I really don't know how it originally started, but even as young as third grade, I remember sketching some of these World War II planes in my notes. And for some reason, even these bomber crews, they've always been some of the most interesting aspects of history to me. And that's something that I get to teach today here at this air base. So I was definitely shy growing up, but I loved being buried in my books, typically nonfiction, often history books. And finally, as I had chances to kind of share some of this knowledge, I realized how much I loved the storytelling aspect, helping people become aware and remembering these stories of individuals who did such remarkable things. I mean, when people use the moniker greatest generation, there is absolutely truth in that. I don't know if our nation could ever pull together again like they did to fight off truly evil in the world that wanted to consume everything. So what these air crews, what these service members, and even those civilians on the home front did always fascinated me. I carried that through my education and fortunately was able to find a position at a place like this.
So how, as a shy kid, because in preparing for this, you talked about you were shy and kind of introverted. When and how did you overcome that to get up in front of strangers and give the passionate talks that you give now?
Somehow it just made a difference when I was able to target things, particularly through aviation. There's just so many great analogies or stories that you can learn from throughout the history of aviation. And as I was able to incorporate those in whatever I was doing, whether that was a school project, I used to give talks in church as a youth, somehow that made it connect and I enjoyed it.
Wow. So Landon, first of all, that is extremely rare, right? To hear of a third grader being fascinated with history, right? And sketching World War planes in his free time. So I know you had mentioned that, you're not exactly sure how you started. And one of the greatest things about guests that we have on the show is that sometimes just through asking questions and kind of exploring the past, we'll discover things that that lead us to really understand like why it started. So if you had to take a guess, why do you think that most kids in the third grade do like things like comic books and cartoons and fiction? What would your best guess be as to what is it that led you to the history books and the planes and things? What would your best guess be?
Well, absolutely for fiction. I think one of the most important things is being able to find yourself in the story. Even if it's a superhero, you may not have those powers, but they might give you that hope, give you your own sense of power in ways. And somehow I think I found that as I was going through real life stories of individuals. I mean, they were doing incredible things. And I think the fact that they were real individuals made it all the more realistic for myself. I'm sure I never went through that thought process when I was that young, but I think that could be some of that connection.
Did you have family that was involved in World War II, or a grandpa or a great grandpa, or anybody that kind of spurred some of this for you?
I really didn't, so I don't know where it came from.
Yeah. I tell you what, Landon, I'm not a super easily impressed person. I'll tell you that. I've coached many people around the country, and, being a policeman and all the other things I've done. Like, Ali, you would agree, like, I'm not super easily impressed, yeah?
Yeah.
And I tell you what, Landon, when I was on that tour and there was these 3 other guys, and, they were kind of doing their own thing, and they would listen to you a little bit, and then they would do their own thing. And I was watching, and one of the things I'm big on is just respecting somebody that's sharing a story, like a music, like they're giving you their talent. And when the guy asked you, like, okay, he asked about your education, you told him you got a history degree, and he said, okay, so you want to be a professor, or, in my eyes, like asking, like, was this a stepping stone to something greater for you? And when you were like, no, this is exactly what I want to be doing. And then you went on and further elaborated and didn't miss a beat, and then went on to tell the next story of history. I was just like, man, this is a guy that is doing exactly what he wants to be doing, regardless if anybody else sees the value in it or doesn't see the value in it. So how did that purpose come to you, and why do you find it so important to share these stories, Landon?
So actually, back to Ray Bradbury. I mean, I have read him since elementary school, and he is one of those individuals who absolutely appreciates history, stories of the past. I mean, he has recollections of crying at phone books, just knowing some of these individuals have passed away and their stories are gone. And actually, in Dandelion Wine, one of his characters is this old colonel, fought in the wars out on the plains in 1800s. And the kids called him the time machine. They would sit around him, listen to his stories. And when he passes away, he says, that's another book. Once all these individuals who knew his name is Colonel Freely, once everyone who knew him and was aware of him is gone, that's one more book that has been burned, one more story that's gone forever. So I think that really imbued in me the sense of it's important to carry on these stories, these traditions. So as I got into my education, I knew I wanted to continue teaching in some way. So I certainly did consider teaching in public schools, that kind of thing. But I've always enjoyed museums. I appreciate the opportunity to specialize. I knew the odds of me getting into an aviation museum as a profession were low, but it was possible. And then I could spend every day focusing on that specific aspect I wanted versus maybe a day or two of my lesson plan if I were a teacher. So honestly, for my first day of college, I was taking classes that would hopefully lead me in this direction, teach me what I needed to do. And I got lucky.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm not a big believer on luck. Man, I'm a big believer that luck for a lot of people is where preparation and opportunity come together. You prepared, you found an opportunity. Some would say that's lucky. I think that's hard work. But what go ahead.
I hope I did some hard work in college.
Wow, you're working hard out there now. Let me ask you this, and because this is one of the things that definitely piqued my interest. I agreed with a statement you made earlier that I don't know if Americans today could come together like the country did in the 40s to face Germany and what I would say was true evil in the world. But if there's ever a chance that may happen again in the future, I really believe it's only going to be possible if we know we did it before.
Yeah.
Which is the importance of the work you do. Right? Because if, like we get on social media and stuff all the time and it's very divisive and separates us, what you're doing is saying, hey, wait a second, world. All these strangers from all over our country that didn't know anybody went to this dusty Wendover, Utah, and one of their missions actually ended the war. Right? So and it's funny because a lot of times people find history boring, but history is hope for the future, which is the danger of erasing history. So
Absolutely.
what would you say to somebody that shows up and wants to erase your history? What would you say to that person in response?
I think most likely an individual who would show up wanting that, whether they're, I'll talk a little bit more about the history in a bit, but whether they're more concerned about our relation to the atomic mission, and I mean just the horrors that unfortunately wreaked, or our history overall, training these bomber crews and thinking we're more warmongers trying to preserve a history like this. The reason that I got into these individuals was not, I mean, absolutely, airplanes are amazing. Some of this firepower, these weapons, I mean, what humans can create is unfortunately impressive. But it was the stories and it was the bonds, the brotherhoods of air crews, the acts of love that you see throughout, I mean, the ugliest times in human history. There are so many acts of love between comrades and even between enemies. I think all of that can be highlighted in efforts of just regular individuals overcoming amazing things, overcoming awful things, simply because there's a need. And this base absolutely represents that. We had tens of thousands of guys come through here because it's what they needed to do, help defend the nation, help defend their families. And they did hard things, living in a desert base like this here in Wendover, just to prepare to head to combat where, I mean, life expectancy was absolutely awful for these guys, but they were willing to do it. So that is absolutely something that needs to be preserved and recognized. There are ugly sides all around for particularly war. We need to acknowledge those, but again, we can't forget them. So please don't erase this.
That's a powerful message there, Landon.
Yeah.
And I like how you did commend the incredible mechanical feats of these airplanes and these weapons and the firepower that we've created. But you mentioned that what was most impactful to you was these acts of love between comrades and enemies. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on whether or not you think that these types of powerful acts of love are possible to exist without such horror and tragedy in the world? Or do you think it's because of this horror and tragedy that we experience that it caused these incredible acts of love to happen? What are your thoughts there?
I think acts like those can happen every day. I think they're just all the more outstanding in the midst of something like a war where you don't expect that. There's hatred all around. I mean, there's propaganda to make these people hate one another. And yet deep down, just as far as humanity goes, they realize there's more that they can do to help someone else. And they put that effort in.
And what are the lessons that you take from that?
If people can do it then, if they've been taught all their life to hate these individuals, like was happening in World War II, I mean, there was a lot of racism involved, fueling just the anger and hatred and allowing these guys to fight was part of the government's hope, instilling this animosity, that we can overcome that today, even in our daily lives. If there's certain groups that we don't agree with, I mean, certainly we can find ways to still reach out to them and hopefully make an impact with our own acts of love.
Dude, I love that, right? You're a curator at a museum where they trained the Enola Gay crew,
Correct.
which dropped the only atomic bombs in wartime in human history. Am I right on that? That's the only time we've dropped them.
Correct.
We dropped 2 of them. And here you are talking about love and peace. And that's what I want our community to understand is you don't have to agree with history. You don't have to have, in hindsight, look back and go, okay, we could have done things different. But you do have an obligation to the future to learn from history. Right? Like, think about what Landon was just telling you. A lot of World War II was fueled through propaganda to make people react and hate another group of people. We have very similar stuff going on around the world right now. Right? Information is being pumped that says this group hates that group and that group hates this group and this group. So what I want you to understand is you are living through a historical time. And how you act now will be viewed by future generations, just like Landon. There may be a museum created somewhere that talks about in the 2020, 2021, it was chaos and political factions and rivalries and hate and discontent. What would your role in that history be based on your actions? And if we thought about that, if we thought, man, there's some young dude like Landon in 3rd grade right now that loves history, and he's studying, what is your role in his story? Is it something you'd be proud of? Were you a peacemaker and a love bringer and you brought people together? Or are you the one that's constantly spitting hate and hate and hate, and you're mask, no mask, vax, no mask, or vax, Republican, Democrat, blah, blah, blah. Were you that person? And it's like Ollie and I talked, I think it was last week, Ollie, we talked about if our life is a story, how does your book read? You know, and that's the thing I loved is like Landon was giving this tour, and yes, this base was designed to destroy, absolutely. But within that became brotherhoods and love, and quite honestly, an understanding that we may not want to have that happen again in the world. But if we ignore it and pretend it didn't happen, it's the ugly little secret in the corner, and we'll just pretend we don't know it, it's going to happen, right? That's how humans work. We forget stuff. So, Landon, I want to commend you. Like, what you're doing is powerful and inspiring. And what I loved was that I didn't leave that tour militaried up, right? And I'm a veteran. I've been in the military. I know how certain things work. I left, like, reflective, like, man, yeah, this is important to study and make sure we don't do this again. So how did you find that message? Because I'm guessing when they first hired you, if you'd have walked in your interview and said, hey, I want to talk about love, they might have been like, I don't know, this is the right curator for Wendover. So how did that message develop for you over time?
So fortunately, some of that, by the time I arrived in Wendover, was already present. Just to give you some background history. So to tell you a bit more about our atomic mission history. So starting in late 1944, Wendover, partially because we're out here in the middle of nowhere, it was deemed a great training base for getting the one atomic mission crew ready to drop the only atomic bombs and the first atomic bombs in history. So starting in late 1944, the crews of like the Enola Gay and Boxcar, we had 13 other B-29s that were modified for this mission to be able to carry Fat Man and Little Boy, the atomic bomb weapons. And here they trained for a number of months, learning how to accurately drop these massive 10,000-pound weapons from about 30,000 feet. And then also here in Wendover, something called, or another aspect of what was called Project Alberta, one of the tail end parts of the Manhattan Project. We actually had a separate group here who was, built over 150 prototypes of little boy and fat man bombs, fortunately non-nuclear. But this was one of the final engineering phases to make sure all the other components of those bombs worked and were ready to be paired with that fissionable material and to be dropped on Japan. So these guys left in kind of early summer of 1945, deployed out to the Pacific to get ready for their mission, which happened 76 years ago this past August 6th and August 9th is when those weapons were used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And you have to acknowledge the absolute devastation that came from those missions. There's all sorts of numbers. Roughly, it was about 100,000 individuals per attack. And that may or may not include residual deaths from cancer and all the horrific things that come from radiation and a nuclear weapon. So I was excited when I arrived at Wendover to find out. But you're right. First of all, I did not pitch myself as, let's just turn this right into a story of love. Because that quickly, I think, kind of turns people off of the veterans themselves, thinking, they could have been terrible people for perpetrating a mission like this. But in their minds, one of the veterans made a comment along the lines of, there was a monster loose and that monster's name was war. And here we were given a weapon that could kill that monster. And they were told it would save millions of lives, which it did, bringing the war to a quicker end. I don't think we realized all of the effects and how awful it would be using those weapons in wartime and against a largely civilian population, unfortunately. But it did have an impact, shorten the war, and still save many more lives of Americans, of allies, and of the Japanese people, because whether they wanted to or not, their government was probably going to make them fight till the death if we had ever had to invade the islands. So when I showed up here in Wendover, they already had accepted, just a couple years prior, a paper crane, which I would say is one of our most notable artifacts in the museum. So the significance of this, it's only about, it's less than an inch wide probably. There was a girl named Sadako Sasaki who survived the bombing on Hiroshima at the age of 2 years old. And unfortunately, by the time she turned 11, she was diagnosed with leukemia, was having a rough time. And she spent, about the last days, or I think it was about a year before she passed away. She spent that last time of her life in a hospital bed. And Japanese legend is you can fold 1,000 paper cranes and get a wish. So of course she wanted to get better, keep on living. So she was working towards that goal. And there's conflicting stories, so I'm not sure whether she actually folded all 1,000 or if she didn't. Her friends and family helped get her to that goal. And this paper crane, so unfortunately she did pass away in the mid-1950s. But this paper crane is one of only a handful in the nation, maybe like 5 or 6 that are in the United States. And her family recognized Wendover as a place that could help deliver this story. And the term we like to use is reconciliation. Mm-hmm. It was not our place to apologize to the Japanese people for what the veterans that trained here at Wendover did. They didn't have to forgive us for what happened there on their land either. But it was that ability to recognize just this impressive story, recognize both sides. There were these guys doing what they thought was right, helping end the war quicker, and realizing the horrors that, there were civilians on the ground who suffered tremendously from this, even though this was meant to hopefully more so impact the military.
Yeah, I love that exhibit. That's actually one of my favorite parts of the whole museum. So talk to me. So that the purpose of the paper cranes is it forgiveness? If I remember right, it's to bring reconciliation and peace and bring people back together.
Correct.
Yeah. I actually took a picture. I'll share the picture with the podcast, because I took a picture of that in the museum because it struck me as what human nature are capable, what we're actually capable of, which is forgiveness, which is, even if we do something that we believe in at the time, later on, if we look back, we can maybe say, okay, well, we wouldn't do it again, but it happened, so let's move forward from it, right? Which is healing.
Right.
And now go ahead.
Sorry. And yeah, you just can't change history. So you need to be more open about how you look at it, explore all the sides, just have a better understanding.
See, that's the point. Heal, right? We heal from it. And you look at U.S.-Japan relations, and for my whole life, they've been one of our best trade partners, one of our best allies, right? And Ali, like, you know, we talked about the Middle East a lot and the constant conflict over there. And a lot of times, we're just not willing to heal from past wounds. And we want to keep ripping scabs off and keep going back and reliving this instead of, okay, what's the lesson here? And let's move forward. So, I love that peace side of the museum as well. Landon, here's something I also want to stress. What I loved about you teaching me history, which is what you were doing, is it was story-based, right? And we know humans learn best in story. So if you had one story of perseverance and a person that just made an impact there, what story would that be? If you met a veteran that came across and like they actually were there, or, you know, like somebody that you really brought this to life for them.
I mean, one of the most rewarding things, I haven't had the chance to meet any veterans that came through here. And of course, my other counterparts here at the museum have had that opportunity, held reunions, met a lot of these individuals. But still to this day, I get a lot of family members, often children, who come through, say, my father served here. And at that point, I try to make the extra effort to help them have that connection. Make sure I take them out to a barracks so they can understand just the lovely conditions that these guys were living in an open bay barracks with, I mean, maybe 40 other guys. An individual was able to find wreckage. He's in the military. He was overseas in France, and he got researching a great uncle of his who lost his life in a B-17 crash in World War II. And somehow he got involved in the recovery effort. They actually found his wreckage. And now it's his effort to be able to recover all of that, make sure that they have all the human remains exhumed, properly cared for, and really tell that story. So he came out here just by happenstance, I think last year in 2019. He had a box of aircraft wreckage. Says, "Do you know what this is?" Looks like an airplane. Says, "Well, according to my great uncle's journal, this airplane was here, and this is the one he was flying in when he was killed overseas." I said, "Well, we need to do something about that." So we, just for a greater connection there, we went out to one of our 4 hangars where those type of aircraft were maintained. So absolutely, that would have spent time in one if it were here in Wendover. And he just had a reflective moment. He actually set some of those pieces out so he could take pictures there in the hangar. We really just almost had a moment of silence. So there's a lot of opportunities, meeting family members, helping them understand what their relatives went through. And oftentimes they say they can feel them there. And I think that's so important and a way to keep that history alive.
Do you believe you can feel history?
Oh, absolutely.
Ali?
I think to a certain extent, yeah.
Dude, all right, so here's the funniest story. Well, funny story for me. So I'm out there, I'm taking this tour with Landon, and I told him where we were camping, and he's like, "Oh, right out by you is the old gunnery range." And he shows me, like, on the map, like, you can get there. So I hike it from my campground. I hike up over this mountain ridge, and it's awesome, dude. I found the circular tracks that the Jeeps went on. I found that first, and then I started going, okay, well, he told me this is going to be over here. So I just sit there, And I swear to God, I'm feeling alive, right? Like I'm feeling like what these young men were going through training to go fight Germans and the survival rate. And they knew, a large number of them would not come back. So I sit on this berm and all of a sudden I hear music. And I'm like, what? And I remember Landon told me, he's like, yeah, the guys out at the base got bored, so they poured some cement in one of the caves and made their own disco. And they would like sneak up there and have these dances. So I'm like, is this a ghost? So I shake for a minute. I'm like, what is going on here? I'm like, no, I hear music. What in the hell is going on? So I'm thinking like I'm having a ghost moment. So I throw my backpack back on. I start hiking towards the music, and up on the ridge by the radar towers or whatever those things are, around this big boulder is a camper van, and the dude's out there taking a shower jamming to his music. So it wasn't quite the ghost of days past, but it definitely made my hair on my arms raise.
Yeah, I bet.
That is fabulous. And we've certainly had accounts of people experiencing or even seeing things around the base that they attribute to our World War II airmen.
Really?
So I really don't doubt that there's at least energies of some sort that still reside in a place like this.
Well, I didn't go in that big ass cave. Now I saw the cave, but Andrea wasn't with me. She wasn't feeling good, so I was hiking alone. I'm like, man, I don't know if I go in this cave by myself. Do you know which one I'm talking about? The big one that sits on the ridge looking back down on the base?
Yeah.
Is that the dancing cave?
No, the dancing cave is actually off to the side. You have to hike a hill, which is all the more impressive. They were willing to haul concrete into it.
And they could get local girls to come up there and dance with them?
There were very few local girls, so they would bus in women from like Salt Lake City or Elko, both an hour and a half away.
Dude, we are
serve as dates for the night. I mean, it was a different place.
We are resourceful, aren't we?
Absolutely. I told you they needed to make it survivable. They needed morale, and they made it happen.
So, Landon, circle to your kids now. So you're teaching and spending your day sharing stuff that happened, what we say, 76 years ago now. How does that impact the future for your children? And what's your hopes that it brings them?
Well, one of the easiest things is I think this is going to be a very fun place for them to grow up. Right now, I have a 1 and 3-year-old, so they don't quite appreciate what's going on. But at least my 3-year-old absolutely loves seeing airplanes. So taking them around the base, giving them experiences, whether that's climbing through our aircraft. We have some vintage vehicles, giving them rides and letting them just experience the history. I mean, they think it's cool to be around Dad's work. But whether it's stories specifically to Wendover Airmen or just any I've come across that I think are impactful and really tell us stories, give us hope that we can do remarkable things ourselves. I mean, even before I had kids, I would collect books like compilations of Medal of Honor winners so that hopefully someday I can synthesize or share those stories with them so that they have an understanding of what we're capable of what they're capable of. Something else I haven't talked about, I'm also interested in the history of the fire service. I grew up around that with a grandfather who was a volunteer firefighter for 50 years. So I've also always loved kind of that aspect of public service, being willing to risk it all to help our fellow man. So most recently, I learned about the man in the red bandana, who was, if you look him up, there's a documentary about him. He was just a guy working in the World Trade Centers, previously a firefighter. Now he's in an office job. And when this happens, I mean, he spent his last hours or last minutes, I don't remember how long it was, helping people find the exits, literally guiding them all the way downstairs, going back and forth. And he was suiting up with the FDNY and climbing back up the stairs when whatever tower he was in fell. I think those are stories that just speak so much to humanity. He probably knew he wouldn't make it out of there, but he knew that he was someone capable of helping, and that's what he did. So those are the kind of stories I'm looking for, and I just bought, they have a children's book now about him. So I picked that up. So when my kids are ready, that's one I can easily share with them. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful, Landon. And see, it's stories like those in history that I think most everyone can receive, right? But for me, growing up and like the public school system coming through there, I definitely wasn't that third grader who was sketching World War II airplanes and very interested in the history books. I always found myself having a hard time getting interested in history unless, like we were talking about, it was through story. So, or experience, right? Like I'm trying to think back on my childhood here, but like a field trip to a museum, right? Things like that, to where I could really have that experience beyond just reading the history book. So for someone like me who didn't find themselves drawn to these books at a young age, what would you say is one of the best ways to find these stories, learn these stories, and share these stories?
Well, I think they're all the more accessible now. And if you prefer stories instead of maybe slogging through what you consider a history book or textbook, I mean, it's so easy to search out these things online and find either videos or other platforms to share them. But really just put forth the effort. If there is a certain topic, there's a history on it, and learn from those individuals who, I mean, maybe helped found the thing. So always my interest was aviation and military history, and that carries to so many other things, what these guys were doing.
Yeah, that's a great point, because as you said that, I just realized, I did just read a history book on the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a biography kind of / documentary called Breathe by Hickson Gracie, and his father founded Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I think you're absolutely right of finding some aspect of the history that really does interest you. For me, as martial arts, for you, it's planes, to where you can be interested enough to truly learn, embody the story, and then share it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think once you get started, I mean, it's just interesting to explore what the people who came before us did. Something that stuck out to me in my college career, we were just kind of having a discussion in class with one of my professors, and kind of out of nowhere, he said, "You guys are setting yourself up for success. When you start studying history from this young of an age, it gives you a greater glimpse and understanding of humanity, and you're able to carry that throughout your lives, and you're going to be spending your lives sharing humanity, hopefully." So I thought that was really impactful of why it's good to start at a young age. So if you can find any way to get more interested, I mean, go from there.
Yeah, why do you think that is? Why do you think history leads to humanity and quite honestly, love?
It leads to an understanding. And when you try to look at history in an unbiased manner, I mean, I've always been patriotic. I've always been proud of this country. But as I went further into history, went through my education, realized just how many black eyes, how many terrible things that the United States have done. I'm still proud of our country, absolutely. But we have to recognize our shortcomings, and being aware of them helps us recognize where they still may be present today, and that there's something we can do. There's people who've been fighting all along, and we can carry on that fight for whatever it might be. That makes us aware, and that gives us the hope and power that we too can make a change in the future.
I love it. And that's how you learn from it, right? If you ignore things, you're not learning the lessons. And why are if you look at a lot of the movies and the stuff that really sells out there, it's historical based, a lot of it. It has some conflict and people overcome things. But it doesn't have to be fictional, right? It's
Right.
happening around you all the time if you stop to pay attention. And one of my favorite things, Landon, is that you're continuing to let people's lives live on long past their physical time here on earth through sharing their stories. Like the young lady in Japan, I think, if I remember right, she died in the 60s, maybe, if I remember your
Yeah, I think 50s.
50s.
Yeah.
And we're literally the three of us who never met her shared her story a little bit today to a worldwide community through a podcast on, in October of 2021. So she's still living and she's still making a difference.
And she was just a young girl who obviously didn't expect that. She wanted to live. She wanted to keep having her life that she was living. And though she didn't expect this of her story, I guarantee it's still impacting us today because that was recorded, that was appreciated, and it's perpetuated.
Right. And what if her story somehow made it somewhere and somebody was, a general of some kind or a commander was thinking about using a weapon like this and heard her story and changed their mind? Right? We don't know that, but we don't know it didn't happen. And that's what we like to stress to our community is all of our stories are important, and getting your story out and sharing your story and taking action. You don't know what impact you're going to create. Just like this little lady in Japan making her paper crane. She had no idea that at some point it would end up in Wendover, Utah, teaching people about peace and reconciliation. But she did something. And a lot of times we hold back. We diminish our own story. We dim our own light because we don't feel worthy. We don't feel like it's our place to share. Somebody else's story is so much greater than ours. But the reality is if you don't share your story, if you don't share the stories of those around you, you don't know what impact you can make.
Yeah.
But by not sharing it, you will not make the impact.
That's absolutely right.
And that's what I love. You are sharing stories that let people live on. And not only doing that, but doing it in a manner that causes people to reflect and think and learn from our history, but also realize that even in some of the darkest days of humanity, there is light and love and hope. And as our community sits and deals with some dark days of going on around the world right now, we have a choice. We can just accept it as that's the way it is, or we can be light and love and hope for those around us.
So, Landon, I'm curious if you had to leave us with one story or one idea that's gonna live on beyond your legacy, what is that story or idea that you would give to us, that you would give to the world?
I think absolutely, as I've studied history and as I've gotten more involved in this museum profession, where we have the opportunity to be on the front line of public opinion, honestly. People trust museums, and it's our responsibility to make history, make any subjects accessible and to everyone. That means we need to share the stories of everyone so we can truly understand perspectives. And so that as we move forward, we can look even in contemporary times at other factions and hopefully understand where they're coming from. I mean, there's still so much hate out there. I don't think we have to make room for tolerance for certain groups, certain actions that are done. But by studying history, it's going to help us understand where that came from, what's wrong about it, and hopefully spread that word that we need to just work together as humankind and that it's absolutely possible. Even in some of the darkest times of history, whether it was racism, whether it was war, so many other things, there have always been individuals out there pushing for a better world, pushing for acceptance, pushing for equity. And I encourage everyone to do that themselves. You guys, I was able to listen to one of your episodes about accepting people where they're at. I think that's so important, and history actually helps us do that. So I would say just try to be better people, try to be more understanding, and know that it's possible for you to make a difference. No matter how great or small, you can do it.
I love that. Well, thank you for coming on here and sharing some of your story and your perspective of life and history here with us and our On Purpose community. Where can we go if we want to follow along your journey or to learn a little bit more about the museum? Where can we direct some of our community to stay in contact with you?
So if anyone for some reason has a desire to reach out to me personally, I mean, you can just find me on Facebook. I will be listed as curator of historic Wendover airfields. That might make it stand out. I'm also on LinkedIn. And if you want to follow Historic Wendover Airfield, get a better idea of what we're doing, trying to make history come alive so people can have these connections and understanding of what these airmen went through in World War II. You can follow us at wendoverairbase.org or wendoverairbase.com or wendoverairfield.org. And we're also on Facebook, Instagram, and we're trying to get our TikTok going. So I'll actually take you on tours around the base, give you history lessons, let you see artifacts. So that's another good way to see what's going on out here.
I love it. I knew when I messaged on Instagram, it had to be you responding. It's historic Wendover Air Base or whatever, because you were the only one remotely young enough to be on Instagram.
I do run most of that. I wear many hats around here.
Yeah, I love it. And for those of you that aren't maybe history buffs, you're more pop culture, stop by Wendover Air Base because they also filmed Con Air there and Independence Day. So you might see some stuff in that. Yeah.
Among others, such as the Hulk in 2003 and a number of other things you've probably seen. So there's something here for everyone. We'd love to have you.
That's right. History includes everybody. All right, Landon, thank you so much for joining us, my friend. It's been an honor to share your story with our community, and you keep sharing stories out there and letting people's lives and legends and legacies live on, my friend.
Will do. Thanks so much, Jerrod and Ali. This has been great.
Thank you.
And remember, team, life is far too short to live any other way than on purpose. We will see you all again next week.